Hello, my beautiful friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm coming to you today from my patio. Thought I would switch it up and record outside. It's a little warm out here, but I really enjoy being out here. So here we are. You're going to get some background noise, probably, mostly birds chirping, maybe the occasional squirrel running across my little overhang roof thing here, maybe some airplanes or trucks or trains. You never know. Anyway, keeps it interesting, right? If you're watching the video of this, it's actually not going to be super interesting. I may not even be looking at the camera very much. I'm actually going to close this so it doesn't distract me too much. Just kidding. I can't minimize Zoom while I'm recording on it. Okay, that's fine. We will just work with that. Bringing this window to the front. Okay, so we're back. Sorry for that. Takes me a second to settle in here. And I want to ask you to follow up on last week's episode. We had a little assignment for ourselves, and that was to be the observer of our own brain. So I want to ask you, how did that go for you? What did you notice? Did you do your homework or did you forget? Sorry, it's the teacher in me. Got to tone that down. Just kidding. Doesn't matter whether you did it or not. But I will tell you what I noticed, because I was also kind of doing this throughout my week. And with regard to my YouTube project, which I've talked about before, so I'm not going to get into that right now. I noticed that I have gotten really sucked into it more than I intended. I realized that my perfectionism is wanting to take over, and I don't want that to happen, because I don't want to be perfectionistic about this project. I just really want to come to you as I am, not you necessarily, unless you've been watching the check-ins. But I want to capture myself as I am in that moment and not try to make it perfect. So anyway, that's what I noticed about what's going on in my head, the tendency to kind of obsess and want to perfect and want to get it just right, quote unquote. But what is right? What is perfect? These are all ideals, concepts that I have in my head that, is probably from the social programming, from partly from my upbringing, partly from, society, and just this idea of perfection and the tendency to like compare ourselves to others and think that if we present ourselves as ourselves, that we're not good enough. That's what I still sometimes struggle with. I mean, who doesn't really, right? I think it's just a human tendency, but I have become aware of that, and particularly aware this week. I notice that comparison tendency is also kicking in, thinking, oh, this isn't going to be as good as this other thing that I watch on YouTube that's sort of inspired this project or whatever. Anyway, that's the first step, right? Awareness of what's going on. So I'm aware that that's going on. I am going to step away from it, give myself some space, give myself a chance to regroup, and just remind myself that whatever I do is good enough. That's a belief that I want to have. That's a belief that I'm choosing. Okay, it's an intentional belief. Whatever I produce is good enough. I think I've heard a quote like, good enough is good enough, or done is better than perfect. So I am really embracing those thoughts, those ideas, to counteract my tendency to make something perfect or to criticize what I produce. The voice of the judge. We talked about the judge and the victim last week, and the victim has also kicked in. I've heard the victim in my head saying like, oh, I'm so bad at this. Why can't this be easier? And the judge agrees, right? It's like that dialogue. The judge agrees and says, yeah, you're terrible at this. Why are you even trying? Like, you shouldn't even, why are you putting yourself out there? Why even bother? Well, I know that those are just voices that makes me sound a little crazy, but those are just, we can think of them as programs in the computer that is our brain, right? Doesn't mean we have to believe them. It doesn't mean we have to let them um, like control our computer entirely. They can be running. We can just let them run in the background, acknowledge them, say, okay, I hear you. Yep, you're the judge, you're the victim. I hear what you're saying. And I'm choosing not to believe you. I'm choosing a different thought, right? So that's something that I've really learned from the book, The Four Agreements. And it's particularly relevant right now as I'm learning this new skill of video recording myself and learning to present myself as I truly am on the camera. Excuse me, 1 second. Quick water break. Oh man, I'm almost out of water. Okay, so that was last week's recap, follow-up, not recap, more of a follow-up. This week, we're going to talk about the first agreement, which is be impeccable with your word. So it's all about the power of the word, right? And there is so much we can say about this. I mean, there are books written about the power of language. And I mean, this chapter, this is actually, I think this is the thickest chapter in the book. It's definitely the most content heavy, the most dense. I'm sure I'm not going to do it a justice here. Listen to that. I'm already judging myself for a performance that I haven't even made. Isn't that fascinating? But what I want to say, let me rephrase that. I'm not aiming to perfectly summarize all of the content in this chapter. If you want to know the content, go read the book. I'm just going to talk about a few points that have meant something to me, and maybe you'll get something out of this as well. So let me start off with this. So kind of connecting this to last week, we talked about how our belief systems as children, oh wait, let me just make sure I'm recording. Oh yeah, I'm still recording. Okay, hang on 1 second, let me pause. And let me see. Okay, recording again. So we talked about last week how our belief systems as children are formed by primarily two ways: what we observe and experience. Okay, so what we observe around us, how we experience that, and also by what we consume in the form of language. What we consume, what language is fed to us, either written or spoken. And that's probably going to be primarily in spoken terms. But anyway, the point is that our belief system, or our book of law, is formed when we're children by what we observe around us and primarily the words that we hear or that we're told. Okay, so the author points out that our word has a great deal of power. It has the power to create or to destroy. And he says it is what manifests your intent. He says intent manifests through the word. Okay, so our ideas are expressed through our words, right? And it has, it's our way of creating our personal dream. And remember, personal dream, quote unquote, is basically referring to our experience of life, our experience of reality. So he says that our word has the power to create a dream of heaven or a dream of hell. So that's sort of the main premise of this chapter, is just the power our word has to create. Okay, which is interestingly echoed in a book that I've mentioned before on the podcast that I read earlier this summer called The 3 Laws of Performance. the power of language and the power it has to, particularly like to create a future, a new future. So anyway, that's just a side note. I thought it was interesting. He uses 3 metaphors to, actually, now that I'm looking at these, technically they're not metaphors, they're similes if we want to be really exact about it in literary terms. But 3, we'll call these, what are they called? Advanced organizers, I think, or devices, language devices to explain what the word can do. So he says the word is like a sword with 2 edges. That's the first one. He calls it a tool. Okay. And it's like a sword with 2 edges. One edge is the power, is how you create a beautiful dream, by spreading love. And then the other edge, the other side of that sword, has the power to destroy everything, and to create a living hell. So the word is a tool. It's like a sword with 2 edges, and it can be used to different ends depending on how it's used. Okay, another one that he gives is the word is like a seed. Okay, the word is like a seed, and the human mind is fertile ground on which it is planted. So that's not too radical to think of. The word is like a seed planted on the ground of the human mind. And he says that what kind of seed your mind is fertile for will determine how that seed will germinate and grow into a plant. So what is your mind fertile for? So he points out that the mind can be fertile for the seeds of fear, or it can be fertile for the seeds of love. And what is your book of law based on? So this has a lot to do with what your personal belief system is based on, and sort of what governs your book of law. So if it's governed primarily by fear, then that means your mind will be fertile for the seeds of fear. So anything that is thrown at you, anything that you're exposed to in the form of language that is fear-based, will have a tendency to take root, to germinate, to grow really well, because that's what your mind is kind of conditioned for. Versus if your mind is fertile for the seeds of love, then you will more easily accept language that is love-based, and that's going to be the seed that's more likely to grow. I have page 28 marked here, so let me just go to that. Yeah, so he said, I'm just going to read a little portion from this. The human mind is like a fertile ground where seeds are continually being planted. The seeds are opinions, ideas, and concepts. You plant a seed, a thought, and it grows. The only problem is that too often it is fertile, the mind is fertile for the seeds of fear. Okay, pretty much covered this part. Right, and he cites the example of Hitler, saying that Hitler sent out seeds of fear, and they took root in a whole society, and it created what he would call a dream of hell, a kind of communal or like a shared dream of hell. He also says one fear or doubt planted in our mind can create an endless drama of events. So really speaking to the power of a few words, especially in a mind that's fertile for that type of language. He also, another metaphor, simile, another comparison he makes is calling the word, he says the word is a spell. That actually is a metaphor. No, he says the word is like a spell, so technically simile. Okay, I need to let go of this poetic distinction. One word is like a spell, and humans use the word like black magicians, thoughtlessly putting spells on each other. So the word is a spell, and we can put spells on each other. So this really speaks to how we can affect others with our words. We cast spells all the time with our opinions. When we hear an opinion and we believe it, we make an agreement and it becomes part of our belief system, right? So that really points to how language is the tool by which we create a belief system. And this is a really good point, which this one really stuck with me. He says that people often spread their own personal poison through their word without even realizing it. And so what I mean, or what he means by that, how I interpret it, is that, so say someone is having a bad day for whatever reason, they might be more likely to make a critical remark to you, or, respond like with a snippy comment, or you know what I mean, right? Like they're more likely to be careless with their language and to be less love-based, perhaps, in the things they say, because their words are colored by their mood, because they're having a crappy day. So this is what he's saying here, like that people spread their own personal poison, aka their mood, if they're in like a negative mood, through their word without even realizing it. And an example he gives in the book of this one is the mother who comes home from work after a really long day, and she's really tired, she has a headache, and she has zero patience. And her daughter, like a young child, is singing really loudly. And the mother, because she's tired and has zero tolerance for anything at that point, yells at her daughter for singing and says something like, "Oh, you sing so off key, you have a terrible voice," without even thinking, right? She's just operating out of her mood, out of, what's the word I want to say? Operating out of ignorance. We'll call it that. But her daughter, being a child, being, having a very impressionable mind at that time, may take that to heart. And those words may take root in the fertile ground of her mind and grow into an agreement that she is terrible at singing. Maybe she never sings again after she hears that tiny, thoughtless remark from her mother. So when we think about how the word can be used, there are sort of three ways. Our word can be used directly with others, like we just saw there in that example. Mom says something to her daughter. It can be used to talk about others, which often takes the form of gossip. It could be positive too. It could be indirect praise, talking highly of someone to someone else. And it can also be used with oneself in the form of self-talk. So let's just think about these three ways in which the word can be used, in which our word can be used, and let's reflect on these a little bit. So we'll start with gossip. Okay, when the word is used about other people, do you find yourself talking about other people in your life to other people? He points out in the book that gossip is a way that humans bond with each other, but that there are negative consequences to this form of bonding. He also cites an example of how gossip can color one's experience of someone else. So say there's a professor who has a reputation for being really strict and mean and unpleasant. And so if you hear from a friend that this professor is mean and unpleasant or boring or whatever it is, that is probably going to color your experience of the professor when you show up in his or her class, right? So maybe you'll agree, maybe you'll have the same experience, possibly because of what your friend told you. You know, you're kind of predisposed to look for those characteristics in that professor, and we're more likely to find something if we're looking for it, versus if we have, you know, a neutral opinion of this professor going into it, then we may have a different experience. This has definitely happened to me. I've had friends tell me certain things about certain professors or even certain students. I mean, this is terrible to admit, but I have had colleagues, you know, talk to me about students that I have or that I'm going to have, whether positive or negative. It's gone both ways. And I've learned through experience not to put too much stock into what they say, not because I don't trust my colleagues, but because, I mean, everyone's different. And I sometimes have very different experiences of certain students just because, you know, I am who I am. I'm different from my colleague, and whatever. We may just have, you know, different personalities and form a different dynamic with students. What else? So that's gossip. That's something to look out for. How about using our word directly with other people? So this is something to think about. Like, how can we spread love through our word? And being aware when we might not be spreading love, when we may be spreading fear or hate. I mean, we probably don't think of it like that, but drawing attention to what we say to our children, to our spouses, to our friends, to our significant other, you know, to our parents, being really intentional about that can help our relationships. And and then self-talk. This is a big one. I mean, we kind of touched on this already with the judge and the victim. But it's interesting to look at like how you talk to yourself. And we all do this, whether you realize it or not. You talk to yourself, okay? You think things to yourself about yourself. So again, assignment for this week is sort of just noticing, let's really focus on the self-talk piece, noticing how we talk to ourselves this week. What are some of the things we say in our mind about ourselves to ourselves? Like, do you hear yourself cheering yourself on, or do you hear yourself criticizing what you've done? Also, what are the most common words you use? Sorry, I was just looking at my notes there. That's why I paused. What are the most common words you use? Since we know now that language is so powerful, let's think about what words we use the most. I'll tell you a few that I have really worked to eliminate from my language. I haven't eliminated them entirely, but I've definitely reduced the frequency of the following words. The word should. Talked about that before on the podcast. The word hope, which sounds innocent, But if you really think about it, it often takes away our power and implies that something is just out there, may or may not work out, saying, I hope this, right? Or I hope that. So I'm really careful about when and how I use that one. The word hate, I hate vacuuming, for example. Like, how often you hear yourself complaining, I hate statistics, or I hate sharing a bathroom with someone. I don't even know why I said that. I'm just thinking like college students, what might they say? um so noticing when we use the word hate, because that is usually going to be a complaint, and that usually means that we're focusing our attention on something we don't like. And remember, what you focus on grows. Where attention goes, energy flows. So that's another one that I have nearly eliminated from my vocabulary, but not entirely. The word busy. Oh my goodness. I used to say this all the time. I used to constantly say, oh, I'm so busy. This week has been so busy. This day has been so busy. Well, you know what? You know what that does? It creates more busyness. Remember, words have the power to create or destroy. But in this case, saying the word busy a lot probably is going to create more busyness. And lastly, two more, the words stressed and the word tired. The word stressed and the word tired. So how often do you say, or do people say, I'm so stressed? Well, that's the same thing with busy. The more we talk about how stressed we are, guess what? The more stressed we're going to be. It's just going to create more of that. Tired. Oh, that's one that I've said a lot this week because I have been tired, because I haven't been sleeping well. So that's one I need to look out for. I'm reminding myself to look out for that one. I'm pretty tired right now, so I'm going to wrap it up. So let's think about that. Take that into your upcoming week and notice what words you say the most frequently, how you talk to yourself or about yourself, how you talk about others. And just remember, that word carries a lot of power. Okay, next week we'll do chapters 3 and 4, which is going to be the second and third agreement. They're a little bit shorter, so I think I'll combine those two. And sorry this has been so long. Also, I really don't feel like I've done a great job with this recording, but I just needed to get through it. I needed to get it done. So if you're still listening, if you've made it all the way through to the end, then man, you are a loyal listener and I love you. Thank you for that. Thanks for bearing with me while I have had a rather tired and slow mind. Tired. There it is again. Oh boy. Okay. Wrapping it up. Signing off. Have a great weekend, whenever you're listening to this. I love you and I will talk to you again soon.